This is a terrible, terrible statement from Noam Chomsky, and he should know better. He should know better. Chomsky article, right? Oof, man. Dude, I'm gonna be honest. Dude, these streams are so hard when I'm out in Kharkiv. Do you know how I am? You can see my face is beat red from filming out all day today in the fields. Going out and doing like 9 hours of filming, and then coming home, then going out and doing interviews afterwards, and then coming here and doing the stream. It is difficult. But you know what makes it even harder? Having to talk about Noam Chomsky's terrible takes. So Noam Chomsky released an article about the war in Ukraine, and I'll just read the title quickly, and I think you'll get the gist of it. Noam Chomsky: Russia is fighting more humanely than the US did in Iraq. To associate the word humane with the Russian invasion of Ukraine in any manner is gross. And the Russians are not fighting a more humane war than the American invasion in Iraq. And we'll talk about it in a second. And I'll try to steelman Noam Chomsky's point to the best of my ability here. But let's read the byline. The US linguist on the war in Ukraine, how the West is provoking China, and why the UK is not an independent country anymore. A lot of crazy takes. Let's read what he has to say here. And you can go read the whole article if you want, but this is the section that I'm most interested in. I don't really care what he has to say about the British. They're British. So let's read the section that concerns comparing the American invasion of Iraq to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. According to Chomsky, Russia is acting with restraint and moderation. He compares Russia's way of fighting with the US's during the 2003 invasion of Iraq, arguing that large-scale destruction of infrastructure seen in that conflict hasn't happened in Ukraine. He adds, undoubtedly, Russia could do it, presumably with conventional weapons. Russia could make Kiev as unlivable as Baghdad was, could move in to attack supply lines in western Ukraine. When I asked him to clarify whether first, before we get to the second section here, this is just a lie. This is just a lie. I don't know why he would say this, why he could think he's saying this. I don't know if dementia's kicking in or what's up with Chomsky, but the Russians have routinely targeted Ukrainian civilian infrastructure as a matter of strategy. The most obvious example, and something that the Russians admitted to openly on like Russian state TV, and Russian government officials would go out and release statements advocating for this, was the targeting of Ukraine's electrical infrastructures during the winter months in an effort to freeze the Ukrainian population into submission. That was done openly. I was in Kharkiv, and I never released this footage because I never knew what to do with the Kharkiv footage. I just never had enough footage for a piece. I'm going to be going back to the city of Kharkiv soon. Maybe I'll do a little bit more filming. Maybe I can get something together. But while I was there, I filmed. It was like a mile away from me. Myself running into like a destroyed sports stadium. It wasn't a sports stadium, but it was a sports facility for recreational sports for locals, because there was missiles flying right over us and hitting the electrical grid of the city as they were trying to knock it out in the lead up to December and winter. It was a part of their strategy, and they were open about it. We have had people going on Russian state TV and openly advocating for causing as many refugees as possible in order to make the Ukrainian nation state unlivable, to increase their odds of being able to push forward by undercutting their recruitable population, literally using mass displacement as a weapon of warfare. We've seen cities wiped off the map. Now, look, I'm not going to defend the invasion of Iraq, and I'm going to try to steelman his argument in a second here, but there were no cities wiped off the map by the American invasion of Iraq. There was radiation poisoning due to some of the weapons that were used during the American invasion of Iraq. There was civilians who died during the American invasion of Iraq. We're going to talk about UN estimates in a second. There were humanitarian consequences for the American invasion of Iraq, instability. caused by the American invasion of Iraq. But there were no cities literally wiped off the face of the earth. And I hate to compare and contrast war here, but it was Chomsky who did it. He's forcing my hand here. I have reported on cities literally being wiped off the face of the map. In my video about Elon Musk's Starlink program in Ukraine on my main channel, DylanBurnsLIVE, you should go check it out. I'm really proud of it. I talk about how one of the cities that we were trying to help deliver Starlink to, and I paid for the Starlink delivery, for the gasoline and for the delivery process, for it to be sent over to a local commander who needed it for his unit, how they were fighting around Popasna. That city's gone. It's been occupied by the Russians. They flattened it with artillery, and the Russians themselves have admitted that the city has 0 buildings left, that every single building in that city is gone. Can you imagine that? Think about that for a moment. You grew up somewhere, I imagine. I imagine not all of you were born in a dumpster, right? You guys grew up in some small towns or cities or somewhere in the world. Imagine you come home after a year away, you're displaced, you come back to your city and it's gone. Your school, just a pile of rubble. Your home, gone. All your belongings gone. Your pets, you have no clue where they are. Everything you have ever known in your community wiped off the face of the earth. Everything. It's impossible for you to wrap your mind around. You can't wrap your mind around it because it's such a horrific idea for anybody to comprehend that the entirety of their life would be upended that way. And that is a matter of strategy for the Russians. They did it in Chechnya. They did it in Popasna. I never pronounce it correctly. I'm very sorry. But they've also done it in Mariupol. The Russians themselves, after they conquered Mariupol and put their flag on the ruins of that city, they themselves admitted that 60 to 70%, according to the occupation forces of that city, had buildings that were completely destroyed, unusable, had to be demolished. 60 to 70%. They blew up drama theaters clearly marked for children. They wrote "child" on the side of the theater, killing over 600 people. Locations that were there to protect civilians, clearly marked, bombed it. When they couldn't take Kharkiv, when they tried to advance on the city and were beaten back every time, they resorted, well, it wasn't even resorted, because resorted assumes that they were doing it for a purpose. They just engaged in a revenge campaign after getting their butt kicked, just randomly shelling the city center. I have personally filmed Russian revenge campaigns in Mykolaiv when the Kherson counteroffensive started and the Russians were getting pushed back and the Russians were under pressure. They panicked and they just started shelling stuff randomly. And I filmed it. It's on my main YouTube channel. It's on my Twitter. And the film that I produced from that is of strikes that ended up killing like 3 or 4 civilians that day and injuring 20 others. And that's just my personal experience with the Russian terror campaign. In the last 24 hours, the Russians struck a gas station and a supermarket in Kherson, killing 22 civilians. 22. That's in the last 24 hours in one location. I'm not even talking about the areas I'm working in right now and the people who are dying due to IEDs and mines left behind by the Russian army. Of the butterfly mines that maimed children in Afghanistan that are now maiming children here because they don't even look like mines. Kids walk up, pick them up, blow off their arm. I'm sorry, there's so many things wrong with this statement, but the Russians, as a matter of practice, have destroyed Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. They've wiped buildings off the face of the earth, wiped cities off the face of the earth, leveled apartment blocks in Zaporozhye, Kharkiv, in Kherson, in Mariupol, in Kiev. In basically every major city in Ukraine, they have leveled apartment blocks, civilian infrastructure. This is a terrible thing for him to say. This is completely not based in reality and shows how completely disconnected from how the war has developed Noam Chomsky is. This is gross, man. When I asked him to clarify whether he was implying that Russia is fighting more humanely in Ukraine than the US did, or actually no, we're going to take a moment. Can we look at some, I think I have some pictures lined up. Can we look at some like before and after photos for destruction of some of these cities. I think I might have a few of them saved. Let me see if I have a few of them saved on Discord. If not, we can just pull them up. We can just Google them quick. I think I've saved. I always, when I see some of the before and after photos, I try to remember that I remember them and place them somewhere so we can look at them later. Let's see. Did I keep it here? No. That's about a grandmother that was tortured by the Russian army. That was about... Come on, I have to have it here somewhere. You know what? We'll just look it up this way. Mariupol satellite images. So recently, satellite images were released by, I think it was Max, or I forget the exact satellite images that were released, but it was updated. It was Google who updated their satellite images of Mariupol since 2021. And these are the photos from March. So these are 1 month after the war started, and Mariupol still went through months after March of fighting. Because when I went to Ukraine it was about, I think it was April, May, they were still fighting for Mariupol. They were still, fighting in Azovstal, and that situation was still going on. And so this is literally just 1 month into the Russian campaign to try to take Mariupol. And look at the difference here. Here's it before. Looks like a normal city, looks like a beautiful city. Here's it after 1 month. They would fight for months after this for this city. Think about what Bakhmut looks like after 9 months of fighting. Or the cities that I've already talked about that were literally wiped off the face of the earth. Do we have any more? Here's one. 1 month. 1 month. I'm sorry, man. Noam Chomsky is completely disconnected from reality. And this is just one city. There's a million different cities like this. Impossible to name them all. It's just so disconnected. Let's read the second half of this. When I asked him to clarify whether he was implying that Russia is fighting more humanely in Ukraine than the US did in Iraq, Chomsky replies, "I'm not implying it. It's obvious." Delegations of UN inspectors had to be withdrawn once the invasion of Iraq begun. He says, because the attack was so severe and extreme. That's the US and British style of war, Chomsky adds. Take a look at the casualties. All I know is the official numbers. The official numbers are about 8,000 civilian casualties in Ukraine. How many civilian casualties were there when the US and Britain attacked Iraq? Ooh, man. He should really stick to linguistics, but let's steel man his argument. So Socialism Done Left, a friend of mine, hang out a few times with him in person. We actually went to an aquarium together in Baltimore. He actually mapped out the comparison between civilian death tolls in Ukraine and Iraq based upon UN estimation. Well, not UN estimates, based upon confirmed UN deaths, what the UN has confirmed. And if you look at this compared day by day for the war in Ukraine versus the war in Iraq, you can see the death toll. Now, the thing that gets me about this, and you can see that Iraq is over Ukraine by a metric of about like 10,000 at the 370-day mark. The problem is the war in Iraq was won in 21. The invasion of Iraq was won in 28 days. The occupation's another story. But the invasion of Iraq was won in 28 days. And after 28 days, UN inspectors went back into the country and they could monitor the entirety of the country. It's 28 days. Also, a crazy comparison, just comparing the American invasion of Iraq and how quick that was compared to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Maybe I'll do a video about that one day, but that's a totally separate thing. The invasion of Ukraine has been going on for 370, 380 days, well over a year. It's been going on for a while now. And UN inspectors do not have access to the entirety of the country. They do not have access to Mariupol and all of the death and destruction that went on there. The death and destruction in Mariupol was so bad, and the hollow graves in Mariupol were so not hollow graves, but the shallow graves in Mariupol were so plentiful that the Russian bombardment would kick up bodies that were dug into the ground. And there were so many graves and people dug them so often that they just couldn't dig that deep to really stop that from happening, or to stop these bodies being dug up by dogs, or just having the dirt washed away by the elements. There have been reports of some of these bodies being buried under buildings. There's been an endless amount of reports about the death toll in Mariupol. Some estimations go close to 80,000 to 100,000 deaths. We don't know how high the death toll is in Mariupol because the Russians will not allow in UN inspectors because they don't give a fuck how many people they care, and they don't want anybody to know about it. Same thing is true in Lysychansk. Same thing is true in Severodonetsk. Same thing is true in every city that the Russians occupy to this day. The UN estimate for civilian death tolls in Ukraine is a unbelievable undercount. Unbelievable undercount. And he knows that the UN death toll in Iraq is a undercount as well. Why? How can he use the UN and Iraq UN death tolls to compare these two wars at this point? He knows that's not a good way to compare these wars, but he's doing it anyway. He should know. If he doesn't, again, maybe the dementia's kicking in, but he should know. Here's another element to the story that I don't think he's taking into consideration. Russia did not get to occupy all of Ukraine. We saw what they did in the territory that they did occupy, producing the largest mass grave in Europe in Izium since the Yugoslav genocide, 440 bodies, engaging in quote-unquote cleansing operations, their words, not mine, in the Kiev Oblast, where they went door to door for anybody of just vague military age, anybody associated with the government, anybody associated with the military, grouping them up and shooting them. We have video of this, we have pictures of this, we have satellite photos aligning with the dates connected to the massacres. The evidence is overwhelming, even if the Russian government still denies it and will not account for their atrocities. And that was in the territory that they could occupy, and they never even occupied a majority of the country. And they were able to produce these crazy amount of atrocities and crazy amount of death toll. The American invasion of Iraq went through the entire country in 28 days. So when you look at the American death toll in Iraq, UN inspectors had access to the entirety of the country, and America occupied the entirety of the country. Russia occupies, 1/3 of Ukraine. And this is the result. And UN inspectors don't have access to a large portion of where Russia committed those atrocities. Like in Mariupol, like in Lysychansk, like in Donetsk. This is a terrible thing for him to say. It's terrible for him to underplay the Russian targeting of civilians and the Russian targeting of civilian infrastructure, the Russian massacres, the Russian quote-unquote cleansing operations, and all of the atrocities that the Russian government engaged in. And he knows that he cannot compare the Iraqi UN estimate and the Ukrainian UN estimate because of other factors that he should be, as a professor, privy to. This is a terrible, terrible statement from Noam Chomsky. And he should know better. He should know better. But honestly, man, this spoils Noam Chomsky on me. This is a disgusting statement. But considering his history related to the Cambodian genocide, maybe I expected too much of him.